and a certain je ne sais quoi. In fact, I knew perfectly well what it was, but refused to employ the vulgar terms currently in use. No, despite our need for additional staff, it might not be advisable. "Have you had any interesting encounters?" Ramses asked, looking over the people taking tea on the terrace. They were the usual sort, well-dressed, well-groomed, and almost all white, if that word can be used to describe complexions that ranged from pimply pale to sunburned crimson. "Lord and Lady Allenby stopped to say hello," I replied. "He was most agreeable, but I understand why people refer to him as the Bull. He has that set to his jaw." "He has to be forceful. As High Commissioner, he is under fire from the imperialists in the British government and the nationalists in Egypt. On the whole, I can only commend his efforts." I did not want to talk politics. The subject was too depressing. "There is your father," I said, late as usual. Ramses looked over his shoulder at the street. There was no mistaking Emerson. He is one of the finest-looking men I have ever beheld. Raven locks and eyes of a penetrating sapphirine blue, a form as impressive as it had been when I first met him. He stood a head taller than those round him, and his booming voice was audible some distance away. He was employing it freely, greeting acquaintances in a mixture of English and Arabic, the latter liberally salted with the expletives that have given him the Egyptian sobriquet of Father of Curses. Egyptians had become accustomed to this habit and replied with broad grins to remarks such as, "How are you, Ibrahim, you old son of an incontinent camel?" My distinguished husband, the finest Egyptologist of this or any era, had earned the respect of the Egyptians with whom he had lived for so many years because he treated them as he did his fellow archaeologists. That is to say, he cursed all of them impartially when they did something that vexed him. It was not difficult to vex Emerson. Few people lived up to his rigid professional standards, and time had not mellowed his quick temper. "He's got someone with him," said Ramses. "Well, well," I said. "What a surprise." The individual who followed in Emerson's mighty wake was none other than Howard Carter. Perhaps I should explain the reason for my sarcasm, for such it was. Howard was one of our oldest friends, an archaeologist whose career had undergone several reversals and recoveries. He was presently employed by Lord Carnarvon to search for royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Searching for royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings was Emerson's great ambition, one he could not fulfill until Carnarvon gave up his concession. Rumour had it that his lordship was about to do so, having come to the conclusion, shared by most Egyptologists, that the valley had yielded all it ever would. Emerson did not share that conclusion. At the end of the previous season, he had admitted to me that he believed there was at least one more royal tomb to be found, that of the little-known king Tutankhamon. He had done his best, without actually lying, to conceal this belief from Howard. One of the reasons why we had come to Egypt so much earlier than was our custom was to discover what plans Howard and his patron had made for the coming season. One look at Emerson's expressive countenance told me what I wanted to know. Despite the heartiness of his vociferous greetings, his sapphirine eyes were dull, his well-cut lips set in a downward curve. Carnarvon had not abandoned his concession. However, Howard Carter appeared no more cheerful. Nattily dressed as was his habit in a tweed suit and bow tie, a cigarette holder in his hand, he addressed me with a rather stiff bow before assuming the seat I indicated. "How nice to see you, Howard," I said. "We tried several times this summer to communicate with you, but without success." "Sorry," Howard muttered. "I was in and out, you know, busy." "I ran into him by accident at the office of the director," said Emerson, who had been haunting that spot for 2 days. He relapsed into gloomy silence. Ramses gave me a meaningful look and tried to revive the conversation. "Like ourselves, you are out early this year, Carter." "Had to be." The waiter approached with a tray. He had, with the efficiency one expects at Shepherd's, noted our number and brought cups and biscuits for all. "The area where I mean to excavate is very popular with tourists," Howard resumed. "Want to get it over before they arrive in full force." "Ah," said Ramses. "So Lord Carnarvon has decided on another season. We had heard he was thinking of giving up the firman." Emerson made a soft growling sound, but Howard perked up a trifle. "One more season at least. I persuaded him we must examine that small triangle we left unexcavated near Ramses VI before we can claim we have finished the job we set out to do." He glanced at Emerson and added, "I have the professor to thank for that. Initially, his lordship was of the opinion that another season in the valley would be a waste of time. But when I told him that Professor Emerson had offered to take over the concession and my services, Carnarvon had second thoughts." "Naturally," I said, managing not to look at Emerson. "Well, Howard, we wish you good fortune and good hunting. When are you off to Luxor?" "Not for a while. I want to visit the antiquities dealers, though I don't suppose I will come across anything as remarkable as that statuette you found last year." "I doubt you will," said Emerson, cheering up a bit. Howard asked about our own plans, and we thanked him for allowing us to continue working in the West Valley, which was properly part of his lordship's concession. After we had finished tea and Howard had taken his leave, I turned to Emerson. "Don't say it," muttered my husband. "Emerson, you know I would never reproach you for failing to follow my advice. I did warn you, however, that making that offer to Lord Carnarvon would have an effect contrary to what you had hoped. Given your reputation, your interest was bound to inspire a spirit of competition in—" "I told you," Emerson shouted. People at a nearby table turned to stare. Emerson glared at them, and they found other objects of interest. With a visible effort, he turned the glare into a pained smile directed at me. "I beg your pardon, my dear Peabody." That brief moment of temper was the most encouraging thing I had seen for months. Ever since my near demise the previous spring, Emerson had treated me as if I were still on my deathbed. He hadn't shouted at me once. It was very exasperating. Emerson is never more imposing than when he is in a rage, and I missed our animated discussions. I smiled fondly at him. Well, it is water over the dam. We will not discuss it further. Ramses, when are Nefret and the children due back from Atiyah? Ramses consulted his watch. "They ought to have been here by now, but you know how difficult it is to extract the twins from their admirers in the village." "You ought to have gone with them," said Emerson, still looking for someone to quarrel with. "Nonsense," I said briskly. "Selim and Daoud and Fatima went with them, which was only proper since they wanted to visit with their friends and kinfolk. They ought to be able to keep 2 5-year-olds from taking harm." "It would take more than 3 or 4 people to keep Charla from doing something harmful, to herself or others," said Emerson, darkly. In this assumption he was justified, since his granddaughter had a more adventurous spirit than her brother, and an explosive temper. However, it was not Charla who returned, cradled in the muscular arms of Daoud. We had returned to our sitting room in the hotel, and when Emerson saw David John limp as a dead fish and green-faced as a pea, he sprang up from his chair with a resounding oath. "Hell and damnation! What is wrong with the boy? Daoud, I trusted you to—" "He's drunk!" shouted David John's twin sister, her black eyes shining and her black curls bouncing as she jumped up and down with excitement. "The boys gave him beer and dared him to drink it," she added regretfully. "They wouldn't let me have any. They said it was only for men." David John, who was as fair as his sister was dark, raised a languid head. "I wanted to know what it felt like." "Well, now you know," I said, for of course I had immediately diagnosed the cause of the boy's malaise. "It doesn't feel very nice, does it? Put him to bed, Daoud, and let him sleep it off." "I'll do it," said Ramses, taking the limp little body from Daoud, whose face was a picture of guilt. Daoud is a very large man, with a very large face, so the guilt was extensive. Ramses gave him a slap on the back. "It wasn't your fault, Daoud." From the quirk at the corner of his mouth